Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Chronicler's Tale. I'm Brian. So today I'm kind of doing a musing, unpacking. It's something that I've been looking at for a while, an observation for years. It's this observation that I've been aware of how people, at least observationally within the United States, where I have the most direct observation, there is a greater degree of youthfulness in people's appearances. I'd say almost as like a general trend line. When I was growing up, I would notice people as they were older, and this goes back to the 80s during my early childhood, and noticing how older people looked, a certain hardness to their face, not so much like badass or mean hardness, but just the features of their face. And they looked old and like they'd weathered storms, energetic and emotional storms, hardships in life, handling responsibility. And I've noticed how there's been this trend, this change, where over time people are becoming more youthful in appearance. I think about myself, I think about my wife, and how as I reached my 30s, later 30s, and going to my 40s, a lot of people would comment, that find out how old I was. They'd kind of look at me sideways and go, "You're kidding me, right?" I go, "No, I'm not." And they'd think I was younger. I looked younger than I was. And I've noticed when I think about my own self, and I think about what I would contribute to my youthful appearance, part of that is diet, where being mindful of nutrition as much as I can and what I'm eating, that plays into the appearance of the skin. Having inner awareness to maintain a balance of happiness in my life. So when I'm feeling stressed out, when I'm feeling overloaded, when I'm feeling things that I'm doing and how it's affecting me in a longer term, such as say like maybe not getting enough nightly rest on an ongoing basis, or trying to carry too much responsibility instead of drawing that line and saying, no, this is where it gets cut off, because the rest of it's just going to wear me down. Having that awareness and that sense of balance also plays into it, because it shows in your parents. You can tell when someone's lived a hard life and they have a lot of mileage. It shows. Lines in the face, wrinkles, darkness under the eyes, all that stuff. And another one, and this is aging me a little bit, was what people used to say was embracing your inner child, which I've interpreted through my own firsthand experience as allowing the part of you that doesn't always live on the straight and disciplined narrow, the mental discipline, allowing yourself to be spontaneous, allowing yourself to kind of connect with that inner intuitiveness, that part that seeks to enjoy the most of a moment in the best way possible. And that might mean be expressed as being silly, which for me it is. It's doing something silly, or just doing something that elevates a level of fun. And I think that shows as well, because if we're willing to let go of things like, I must be responsible, I must take care of this, I must be a certain way, and mental walls that we have, and just saying, man, whatever, that that contributes to that youthfulness. And I've seen that just as a general trend line as well. But now this also spills into cultural influences. When I think about growing up and think about where we are today, we're looking at, a 30, 40-year gap here, and how when I was a youth, we didn't have kid-friendly playgrounds. For us, a safe playground surface was bark chips. That was the innovation, bark chips. Otherwise, we had a playground that was built on top of asphalt or cement. Maybe it might be on grass. But bark chips was the innovation for safety, and still get a splinter sometimes. And you look at today in playgrounds, and playgrounds have buffeted, rubbery surfaces, or bark chips, or rubber bark chips, and equipment's much more mindful of safety. And we didn't have kid-friendly. There wasn't kid-friendly meant places where you could take where the kids could make noise and it wouldn't bother the other people that didn't want to listen to kids. That was kid-friendly. That's what the code word was. And today, kid-friendly, it's become family-friendly, meaning it accommodates the behaviors, I suppose you could say the needs for a certain demographic of human beings, in this case, children, people of a certain age, children. And that demographic, we've created things that focus on allowing that energy to be a part of our everyday world. When I think about, excuse me a sec. All right, scratch your throat there. When I think about a lot of our world, when I was growing up, we didn't have these things. We didn't have, and I'll mention helicopter culture as well. We didn't have family-friendly stuff. We had, we rode around on bikes. We didn't have the knowledge and the mentality and the culture of safety to start wearing bike helmets. Never did. I didn't start regularly wearing a bike helmet until well into my early adulthood. Playgrounds, we're playing on asphalt. We scraped our knees and elbows. We got cuts. We got bruises. We didn't, we essentially, in a comparative look, we were living in an adult world. Standards were whatever it was. And when someone reached adulthood, those were the standards. And children, our world was built by those standards. And children, people my age, grew up in that world of adulthood. And I could see how, if you take that and make a trend line of, well, prior to this, that's all you had, versus going into the 80s and then the 90s and the aughts and then now, where you have family-friendly stuff that actually allows for that expression, that nurturing of that behavior, of that energy, of that human expression. It allows for and also nurtures a certain softness. And I understand through my own eyes, creating these things is to, one, it's commercial, it's an economic incentive, accommodating these things, but also it's a cultural thing where people are okay with this. And it makes me wonder, is this coming from a voice from within that through all the things that's changing from the right with the rising human consciousness, is this one of these things where the more natural order and condition of human society is to have these elements within it, and the softness we're seeing, the youthfulness, the trend of youthfulness, where I'm thinking about, I was watching Major League Soccer, the playoffs, and the goalie for Minnesota United, he's somewhere in his early 20s. He had the most youthful face, but yet he handles his responsibilities like a grown-ass adult. And it's just interesting seeing that just, for me, a dichotomy, because growing up, I think about sports athletes and how, I think about football players and how they have a very mature, or just a lot of professional athletes have a very mature face within their early 20s that a lot of people wouldn't get into their later 20s. And this brings up questions in my mind. Is this something that society, is this one of these experiments where we go, well, maybe we went too far? Because when you throw on top of this, I guess the filter that can distort the outcome here is helicopter mentality of parenting, where you overprotect the child, where there is this counter trend to living in the adult world, the adult standards world, which is, well, just face things and you'll grow up to be a responsible ass adult. You'll learn self-sufficiency. You'll learn boredom, which drives people to imagination. You'll have learn self-responsibility. And I think, a wise man once told me, he shared with me, he said, the more complex the being, the longer the maturation process. So you think about bacteria, it goes from creation to full, adulthood or its final state very quickly. And then go up the animal kingdom. Birds, it's a fast process. Horses is a longer process. Turtles, and then you got humans, whales, and you got humans. Humans is a long process. It takes decades for that biological process to happen, for that maturation process to occur. And when I look at kids, I suppose we could also overlay a layer of technology that rearranges our definition of what the path of maturation, what maturation is. But it's still, it boils down to the question of, is this trend of youthfulness, is this an underlying thing that as the rising human consciousness becomes more, we more prominently feel it and express it within and through ourselves, this is the trend line. And it's not just a social experiment like helicopter parenting where we fell into a behavioral pattern and now we're seeing the consequences and have to make adjustments? Or is this the trend line and everything else kind of conforms to that? I think it is the latter, but I just find it interesting of how that is. I don't know. This is my musings, and I thought it was worthwhile because I made that observation about how, I guess, this new added component of kids today are living in a world that accommodates that mindset, that youthfulness. And it seems to be a self-reinforcing loop where it's a product of this change mentality, but also reinforces the mentality. And then comparing that to prior to that point, which is the growing up in the world of adults, where it's, kids were living in a world that more conformed to the standards, the needs, and the energetic expressions of adulthood. So it's interesting. I saw a quote about how when you're raising kids and you think about, well, when I was young, you can't apply that standard of when you grew up because the world you grew up in no longer exists. And on that sage note, I'll wrap up this musing. If you made it this far, thanks for hanging out. Hope you got some from it. And with that, you can follow Chronicler's Tale on all the social media platforms listed in the show notes. And with that, be well, everyone. Talk to you soon.